for bringing these points across. And coming up, we have also two speakers from Spanish Ministry. We have Ms. María Pilar Vara de Rio, Deputy Director General of Scientific Research and Marine Reserves, accompanied by Mr. Guillermo Bravo, both working at the Spanish Ministry for Fisheries. So thank you for being with us today, and the floor is yours. I see you both have your microphones, so it's perfect.
Can you hear me? Is it working? Perfect. Well, good morning to you all. We have structured or aimed to structure our presentation in two parts. I will share the first part of the presentation about examples that are currently in existence in Spain. We know how to manage our PMAs from the perspective that has been shared this morning, with follow-up, trying to be flexible, adaptive. From the fisheries points of view, protection is possible not only of fishing resources but the environment where they are found, because we cannot detach these two matters. We would like to share an example that is only 38 years old. We are still learning, still getting started. But we also want to present that our legislation, the Spanish legislation, is already adapted to continue the work that we are seeing today. For many years, we have fisheries management measures, although they might not be as clear as what I was saying before, but there are many other alternatives and options that can help us reach the goals that are exposed this morning. What we want to make clear is that we have the experience in sustainable fishing management, and we have the capacity to adapt ourselves with the collaboration of all relevant stakeholders. As we were saying before, we tried to present to you our marine reserves, what we call fishing interest marine reserves. This is a concept that we want to make very clear. When we talk about marine reserves, we're not talking about a sanctuary. We're not talking about a space where all human activity will be banned and prohibited. What we have learned in the past 38 years is that we can definitely manage a space where both human activities are carried out, a space where you can fish, a space where scientifically we can prove that we are still protecting all biodiversity. Currently, we are managing 12 fishing interest marine reserves, with 9 in the Mediterranean, 3 in the Canary Islands, and we should add all the others that are managed by the regions, not a national level, but a regional level. More than 2,000 hectares, out of which 10% are an exhaustive reserve zone. What a marine reserve entails is talking a lot. It is crucial that we sit with all relevant stakeholders, with the fisheries and other sectors that might carry out activities like diving, leisure fishing. We need to count on NGOs. It's fundamental that we have scientific assistance at all times and the collaboration of all administrations. So for 38 years, we have worked on this. We created the first marine reserve in the Tabarca Island. From then onwards, we have sought to maintain fishing resources. We have sought the protection of a good environment, because these two concepts cannot be detached. We also want to support the artisanal fishing sector. This morning we were talking about indigenous peoples. It's true that we have many areas in Spain that have a traditional fishing culture. Spain has a very vast fishing tradition. We can never forget the protection of essential habitats for fishing. So how are we working? Well, we always work basing our decisions on science. These are governance lab, participation labs, for all relevant stakeholders with good practice codes that must be implemented with the principle of precaution, with an approximation to the ecosystemic based strategies, and we are managing at small scale, but we are talking about a very comprehensive management with the support of regulations and legislation that has to do with fishing. A marine reserve will come with a management plan too, with zoning tools. We want to define the activities that will be allowed in these areas and the conditions for these activities to be able to be carried out in a respectful manner, and we will base our management on 3 fundamental pillars, the first of which is control and surveillance. As we said before, any other zone where we want to protect but without the surveillance and control system would end up being a mere bureaucracy. Every marine reserve needs to come with a monitoring, control, surveillance system. We will also carry out a scientific follow-up directly through our biologists allocated to each of the marine reserves, and with the collaboration of different national level scientific associations, namely the Spanish Oceanographic Institute, and to the same extent as the other factors, we will carry out dissemination and awareness raising exercises to disseminate our work among all of those involved. I'd also like to highlight that we will be managing fishing activities, but we have also been able to coexist with other activities, as I was saying before, for instance, leisure fishing, diving, other recreational uses. Some of the marine reserves in Spain are of a lot of interest in the world of diving, and they also contribute to the conservation of nature. Now, what are our main indicators? The spillover effect or reserve effect. If I manage to establish a well-conserved area, what we are seeing through our scientific follow-up is an increase of the fishing stock densities, an increase of the average size of the fishing stocks, and the reserve effect, the maintenance and improvement of habitats that we cannot detach from the activities carried out within. Just to give you an exact summary, here you can see the hectares of marine reserves, those with an that are a comprehensive reserve or full reserve, and the rest of the reserves and the total surface. Now, the management of these reserves will depend on the allocation of resources to the 3 pillars that I mentioned before, this legislative support, the legislation framework that is so crucial, but allowing for the flexibility of management so that we can adapt our measures, and last but not least, follow-up, monitoring, and dissemination activities.
We also cooperate on many projects, both at regional and European and international levels. And to highlight the big numbers we've talked about before, there are over 5 million euros for the yearly management of these MBAs of fishing interest. We've proven that we can manage the space, we can maintain the space of the features of the space as we keep on fishing on it and having other activities. We have the experience, therefore the knowledge, and we also have the law support and management support that is needed. With all of that, our goal is to go beyond these MPAs of fishing interest to have a responsible fishing management. We know what the goals of this 2030 agenda are. We believe we can fulfill them with many of the actions that we've taken from the fishing management point of view, always based, and it was also mentioned, on that decision-making process that has to be on the best knowledge, on the best scientific available knowledge. And we would like to remind that the fisheries law from last year, 5 from 2023, it's also goal of fishing research to reinforce this part and to have more support to that connection between science and fisheries policy. As we were saying, this support that we can also see in this fishing law, it also makes it to be our pillar, so we can start different management plans to establish different closures. We've worked a lot on technical measures. We're working a lot on everything regarding selectivity. We are present on the signing of international fishery agreements, international organizations. We have the systems, we have the areas, and we're working a lot on how to quantify. So all of this is recognized and can be included in that 2030 goal. This morning, I wrote down the main pillars on which we had figures on which we work today. And I think it's really easy for that closures, management plans. We are proving that there's effective management, that we're looking for conservation, that we have those monitoring programs, because the idea of the Secretariat is not to close an area, is not to have a closure and that's it. Is to have that scientific monitoring to see that that closure is correct and it's fulfilling the goals. Otherwise, it will make no sense from the fisheries management point of view or sector. So this was the part we wanted to highlight with this first area of our knowledge, of our experience, and from that need of scientific knowledge, which is our job. And Guillermo will present these other figures we were talking about. Thank you, Pilar. And while the presentation loads, the general idea of the presentation, what we wanted to show you, it was the state a bit of the technical measures that we have implemented in Spain, both at the European level, from the European laws and national laws. We will see a bit, we were focusing on the ones affecting the surface, so to speak. So as I was talking about, on the first part, we had an introduction of what OECMs are, but I have a cheat sheet on the spot because I have to tell you, I didn't know a lot about that. Then, as we were saying, we're going to see a part of the regulation. Don't worry, because it's extensive and complicated regulation, and the technical measures are quite powerful. The fishery sector, as you know. But for you to have a general idea, then we will get on vulnerable marine ecosystems, minimum funds, closures, which could be a space of temporary, and fishery restricted areas, and then we'll get the conclusions. So this is something my colleagues helped me, but I already got some conclusions for everything we talked about throughout the morning. So for me it's interesting, OECMs, or whatever you call them, or the effective methods of conservation, that we have the definition but not the acronym. And one of the things that was interesting for me is that it's a measure that comes from fishing. So it's interesting because all these measures usually have an original environment and classic measures, traditional conservation measures. It's not considered a protected area as such, which is interesting because it opens more possibilities. Another one of the things is that it bears in mind cultural and socioeconomical phenomena, because you know fishing, there are some regions in Spain that are highly dependent on fishing and fisheries, so to bear that in mind is really important. These are areas when there are already measures, so that's good because we have implemented measures, and initially what we would need to do is to just join all of them on the single plan or management plan or whatever. So these are measures that you need to control. Control in Spain, specifically of the technical measures, is really powerful. You control on land, sea and air, and when I can guarantee that at the global level we are on the first theory regarding control and inspection. Management, of course, management measures, monitoring, because you have to be able to monitor it, and the fishing sector has to participate together with our sector. So we cannot forget about scientific information, as Pilar mentioned. It's really important. Every time we take measures, it has to be based on the best scientific information that we have. Allow me, because I'm going to start my countdown so it don't go overtime. Okay, let's get into it. Okay. This is a bit what I wanted to tell you about, but we did that on the spot. This is the European Union regulation. The main source is Regulation 3080 from 2013, establishing the common fishery policy. I'm going to go into detail. Then we have Regulation 2019-1241, focusing on technical measures. And finally, we have, yes, this regulation, 2016-2336, that emphasizes deep sea population stocks. Spanish regulation, we have law 5 from 2023 of sustainable fishery and research that Pilar talked about, and a lot of regulation that I'm not going to mention because it's not the purpose of my presentation and I don't want to bother to bore you. So Regulation 3080, which is the one establishing common fishing policy, focuses on conservation of biological marine resources and management of fisheries, and the member states have the possibility of adopting within the 12 marine miles additional measures. What are these measures? We have conservation, sustainable conservation exploitation, that we're not going to go into it regarding quotas and so on, but that within this presentation and this day are not the purpose, and we're going to focus on the technical measures, just on some of them. Therefore, what I'm interested about on the technical measures is space and temporary closures, because the size of the mess and extension for what we're seeing, we don't consider that to be quite operational, and minimal sizes that's not also the point. Let's move forward. We'll start with vulnerable marine ecosystems, VME. Don't be scared with the test, because I'm going to give you some maps, which is what I like, to show you the surface that is covered so we have an idea. VMEs start from Regulation 2016-2336 that set some specific conditions for population in deep sea. And the regulation establishes the areas on which that are managed, where it was detected, or they could be vulnerable marine ecosystems, are included on Regulation 2022-1614. The important thing about this is the goal, which is to prevent significant adverse impacts on vulnerable marine ecosystems as a result of deep sea fishing on deep sea. And this is important, deep sea, and to guarantee long-term conservation of deep sea fish stocks. And we see another term, long-term, that management measures need to be in the long term. Regulation establishes that on these areas that we're going to see, there's no bottom long line, because on bottom fishing, what we understand as bottom fishing will be trawling, bottom line, long line gill nets, which includes scratches, volatile, minor gill nets. So here we have an example of the different areas that are established and enforced in the Gulf of Cadiz. In these areas, you may appreciate over here would apply this ban. So as you see, throughout the presentation, you will be able to verify the maps that we have here. The areas seem small, but they cover a big surface. You see that the scale is for the whole Gulf of Cadiz, and that's something to bear in mind. Let's go to the north of Spain, Cantabria and Galicia. You see all the areas that we have. And throughout the whole coast of the Cantabric, we'll see all of this as well. These areas are independent from the ones that we're going to see next. So throughout the presentation, we'll see a lot of surface covered with different technical measures to have a general overview on how to increase all of them or integrate all of them. Another one of the important measures, and this talks about trailing, is the ban of fishing on some minimum funds. So starting at some depth, you can fish, but if less depth than that, you cannot. And this is important because throughout the Spanish coast, there's an imaginary line where trolling cannot go in. And it's said by Royal Decree 502 from 2022, which regulates fishing grounds. And this is one of the measures. As general rule, in the Cantabric and Northeast, funds have to be more than 100 meters. Within those 100 meters, you cannot fish. In the Gulf of Cadiz, it's 50 meters, and there are some exceptions. I'm not going to focus on the exceptions. You have them here in case you want to know. Otherwise, we'll go too much into detail. Same for the Mediterranean. In general, funds above 50 meters. But here you have some important exceptions because there are some areas where the 50 meters are really close to the coast or further away. Over here, you can have a general idea. You have the minimum trawling borders from the Gulf of Cadiz, and you see that this whole area will be banned, and pay attention to the extension. Regarding Cantabrian and Northwest, everything within the blue line will be forbidden. And I'm giving an example of what happens in the Mediterranean, because the Mediterranean, I would have to talk about the Mediterranean, I would need to give you 50 maps, and that's not the purpose of this lecture. But you can have an idea of the level of protection that we have in this sense. Also to emphasize the control of these measures, because the CSP, Fishing Monitoring Center, takes care of this. Vessels above 15 meters and all the exceptions have a blue box. A blue box that issues a signal to a satellite, and that signal is received by the Fishing Control Center, so you know where the vessel is, and there are operators in the monitoring center indicating and monitoring the activity of the fleet. If a vessel will go inside the area we talked about, an alarm will beep and they will start a sanction procedure, a procedure of inspection. There will be minutes and then a sanction procedure. Okay, now we're going to go to the main measures on the fishing grounds. On the Northwest Cantabrian, the order for the main measures, they are morphed, but for you to have an idea, is order AAA 2534/2015, which is the management plan for vessels in the census of the Cantabrian and Northeast National Fishing Ground. There's an annex that includes a number of measures. For instance, the ports in the Northwest Cantabrian, there are limitations with some fishing with certain fixed gears and other minor gears. There's an example based on this fish, but it's depending on the quota. And in that case, this is based on mackerel, and there's some ban for that you cannot go for 2 periods of 30 consecutive days. But this is the one we want more. There is some closures that could be permanent or not. So here we can see that this is the general mission of the Cantabrian, and in the next slide we'll see a partial view. For instance, the coast of Galicia. This is a temporary crawling ban that goes from October 1st to January 31st. You can see the ones from the Asturias and Cantabria coast, where we have this ban from Callejon and Carreter, which is a temporary one, and a permanent one in Llanes. And you can see the surface of these bans. That's really important. It's also really important in the coast of the Basque Country, where we have in Bermeo permanent ban, and in Fuenterrabía as well, and temporary ones in Getaria. and you can see the area that it covers. Let's continue the Gulf of Cadiz. In this case, this is regulated on the fishing plan from Gulf of Cadiz. No, sorry, in Order AAA 1406 from 2016, which is the fishing plan from the Gulf of Cadiz. And in this case, my colleagues indicated a reference to these PRRs, which is a temporary ban that includes also the sea bass, so these two types of fish. The management plan also has an area for trawling. So, for instance, regarding there's a temporary ban that you cannot fish langoustine, and another one for octopus. So this is quite general and quite fast, so we have time for it. And now we go to the Mediterranean, where we have this order that creates a management plan for the conservation of demersal fishery resources in the Mediterranean Sea, and in the annex establishes different closures. We have a number of them, as you can see, quite small. The blue ones are for trawling fleet, and the green one for trawling and hooks. So you have all the permanent ones, and the same on the Balear Islands. The green one is for trawling, and the blue ones just for trawling and not hooks. So we keep on adding protection surface. In the Valencian community and part of Murcia, the same. The part of Catalonia, same. A ban from trawling, hooks, and mesh. And there are other bans of 4 weeks, uninterrupted weeks, for the protection of hake. And look at the extension that we have of protection for these species. Okay, let's see. Yes. Okay. And now we get to the ban areas for fishing, restricted areas for fishing, which are included on aspects regarding General Commission for Mediterranean Fisheries. I never get the acronym for this one. Well, this comes from here, and they start from recommendation from CGPM 45/2022-11 that establishes minimum requirements of a restricted area for fisheries, also known as FRAs. FRA. And what's a FRA? FRA is a definition of a geographically defined area in which the certain fishing activities are temporarily prohibited or restricted in order to improve the conservation and sustainable management of marine life resources on the GFCM application area. We'll see that with an example now that I'm going to give you now. Also, these kind of areas establish some management measures. You have to recover data, data collection, monitoring, and research, and you have to inform about the measures. In Spain, we have this one over here in France that affects our vessels, and this whole area over here that is considered as a FRA, and that are deep sea and the Mediterranean. Starting at 1,000 meters, you cannot trawl. So you have to pay attention again to this big extension for trawling. And now, conclusions. As I've mentioned at the beginning, the purpose of the presentation was not to get in-depth on this regulation, but for you to have a general idea on the different measures on number and complexity, and to show the level of protection of biological resources and marine ecosystems in Spain. The General Secretariat is fully committed to the objective of achieving biological sustainability of marine resources in order to ensure the environmental sustainable exploitation, environmentally sustainable of said resources, and long-term viability of the fishery sectors. And this is important because this has to be compatible with the environmental approach, with the fisheries approach. The complexity, extension, and diversity of the technical measures, established on the basis always of technical criteria, scientific advice based on the best available scientific information, and the participation in the fisheries sector itself, because it's important for the fisheries sector to participate when these measures are adopted, together with an ecosystem approach and the application of the precautionary measure principle, which is important, ensure that fishing activity is sustainable and compatible with the conservation of the environment and with the social and economic aspects of the environmental sector itself, which is really important. Therefore, the surface of the seabed protected in a Spanish jurisdictional water based on the national and community fishing regulation is important, is considerable. And the different measures presented during this presentation, and the ones that I did not include it, so it wouldn't be too extent, highlight the importance of protecting fishery resources and ecosystems and habitats associated with them. As it was already mentioned throughout the presentation, the fishing sector is the main interested in conserving these resources because their very survival depends on it. And administration, of course, is also really keen on this. We cannot forget that this is economic, cultural sustenance, and fishing resources are also important to provide to society high-quality food, protein, together with omega-3 and so on, so really important. And finally, I would like to thank Cepesca and all the participants for the opportunity to participate in this event, to be able to share experiences and knowledge, especially regarding this aspect. We're talking about OECMs that are really interesting. I don't know if for the present or the future we can keep on working on it, but it's an option. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both our speakers for presenting us current fisheries conservation measures implemented in Spain, looking into specifically the ecosystem-based approach, the 3 pillars of sustainable development, not only the environmental, but also the social, economic, raising more awareness about cultural angles, health angles as well, as we've just heard. The importance of working with all sectors, NGOs, scientific community, and all administrations. And, of course, the intention of the ministry to go beyond MPAs, looking into OECMs and how they fit the broader picture. And last but not least, of course, as well, some practical examples from the floor. So thank you once again for that.